do you believe the polls? Do you believe the panic that is supposedly infested conservative ranks?
I guess it depends on who you talk to. I mean, I think the polls might be just capturing the fact that Mr. Carney has received an awful lot of media attention recently, which is, free publicity. Um, because he's a new quantity, he's a new prime minister, and people don't know anything about him. So he's getting a lot of publicity, and he's on TV a lot, and there's talking about him a lot. So it may be capturing that. I also think that people don't really start thinking about their real decision in an election until much closer to the election date, the last
Agreed.
week or two.
I think that obviously there's some liberal momentum. How much it's manufactured, we shall see. And I think the media has a large part in that. But this campaign reminds me a lot of the recent presidential campaign in the US, where a very challenged Democratic nominee put in place through very sort of bizarre and undemocratic measures was foisted upon the voting public. And of course, the Quisling media lined up and said the polls are showing Ms. Harris with a resounding lead right until the moment that Donald Trump won a resounding landslide, both in the Electoral College and in the popular vote. I'm dubious as to the polls, but I don't deny that Mr. Carney has some momentum and some wind in his sails.
Yeah, I mean, it is fascinating though. I looked at a lot of YouTube videos from sort of alternate polling sources in the lead up to the U.S. election, and really, it's for my own edification to try and get some bearings in terms of which reality I want to situate myself in. And the things that I watched, the polling narratives that I watched on YouTube were right. Everything that was said by the people that I watched turned out to be true. All 7 swing states and so forth. I'm not going to list them all here. You all know the ones. But the sort of standard legacy media polling was completely wrong. So the election in the USA turned out exactly as the people that I watched predicted. So what is fascinating is, I'm 60 and I have never seen such a divergence between the official sort of network sponsored polling and the outcome. This is not normal. I mean, the next generation's getting used to it, but it's not normal. And, so I am very concerned that what we're looking at here is sort of a new type of media. We all agree there's a new kind of media. It's really opinion and propaganda packaged up as media. It's algorithmically derived, whatever the clickbait wants. Um, and I'm concerned that it's really a large amount of push polling. In other words, they know that if the liberals look like they've had this sudden surge, I mean, when have you ever seen a 20% swing between two parties in like weeks?
Yeah.
And I think they're trying to undermine the confidence of the conservatives and cause a sense of panic. And at the same time, convince voters that, oh, let's jump on the bandwagon. I don't
It's
know if it'll last.
it's voter suppression intentional in some degree. It's funny because I was in the bank the other day, and it's you see who's thinking what. I mean, I don't talk to a lot of young people. Actually, that's not the case. I work with a lot of younger financial planners who are fantastic and fiduciary driven and all that kind of stuff. They're very aspirational and not ideological, but very conservative. They see the freeing up of capital, the ability to buy homes, all that kind of things as fundamental to building a robust and peaceable society. And then I ran into a nice old lady in her probably early 80s in the bank the other day who was mortified. She'd been clearly feeding on CBC for the longest time and had a profound case of Trump derangement syndrome. But when I had engaged her in a very polite conversation about, the tariffs, for instance, she thought that the Americans had fully tariffed Canada, whereas, as far as I know, the only thing that's been tariffed is Canadian steel, and that's largely due to the perception, whether or a reality of Chinese dumping through it. There are no tariffs really in place right now, although Doug Ford has, as a political stunt, seen to it that I can't freely buy bourbon as much as I would like, but I only live 40 miles from the border, so that will take care of itself. But it's clear that they are trying to target certain demographics. The old school liberal voter, the boomer, the senior citizen are being scared into voting liberal and told that there's this tsunami of liberal support, and I just don't see it. I've talked to folks on the ground in the campaigns, and I'm seeing more enthusiasm on the ground and at rallies on the conservative side. So I think that there may be something of a chimera going on here with our liberal friends. What do you think?
I do, but I also think that we as a party, and I say we because I do support, the conservatives in this election for sure. We need to do a better job of messaging. So there's like a
Agreed.
long history of the media sort of colluding with the Liberal Party to do these last minute bait and switches. This isn't the first. I mean, you're a similar vintage to me. You're a little younger and better looking, but
Not true. Look at that
this
lovely hair you have.
this costs a lot of money. No, but so there's a long history of the Liberals when they get themselves a little offside in the public polling because they've gone too far to the left to sort of pull a bait and switch. I mean, we're old enough to remember Kretchen running saying he was going to get rid of the GST or get rid of free trade, and of course, they reversed themselves in office. But so the problem is the media doesn't hold the liberals' feet to the fire and remind the public that when they're in office, they change things. And they don't tell the truth, for example, that Paul Martin didn't actually do any cutting of federal expenditures. What he did was he cut the health and social transfer. Remember, the feds collect tax
Yeah,
money
downloaded it to the
for
provinces.
the
I remember.
provinces, and then they give them a check to cover their health and their teachers and everything. So what he did do was just bail out, cut nothing, make no hard decisions. And Mike Harris is the one that actually did the hard cuts and was vilified for it.
Hmm.
But they ride shotgun. They're also doing this stolen valor thing, saying that Carney rode us through the 2008 crisis. No, that was Jim Flaherty.
A
He's
great man
it's
who I met
stolen
several
valor.
times. What a solid individual he
Jim
was.
Flaherty saved Canada.
Yeah.
Stephen Harper, with Jim Flaherty's stewardship, saved Canada. They made the decisions that were difficult for a conservative to make, to put in stimulus, to put in some money and some liquidity and do some things to spend some money, which was anathema to Jim Flaherty personally, I'm sure. But it was a tough decision for a conservative to make, but they made the tough call, and that saved Canada. And they pulled the stimulus at the right time to avoid monstrously increasing the debt more than they needed to, and took flack for it. So their timing was perfect. What did Mark Carney do? He dealt with interest rates and inflation. So what? He was not the author of that, but they're lying about it.
And
If
then
we had an honest,
left his term before it was completed to go off to the Bank of England, where he, for whatever reason, wasn't given a second term and was not raised to the peerage. I'd love to know why. I know the Telegraph's writing about that kind of thing, and I wish Canadians would look beyond CTV, Global, the Globe and Mail, and the CBC for their news. But Johnny, what do you think Pierre needs to do? And we're only in a week into the campaign. He's a good campaigner. I think he's going to do wonderfully in the debates. But what does he need to do? Well, how does he need to get on message, and what does that message need to be?
I think he needs to be nimble in his messaging. I think we need to recognize there's a reason this election was called immediately. Everyone's reacting
Exactly.
in real time to the Donald Trump tariff thing, and it's tough sledding for a guy who's sort of mimicked the Trump message in terms of social policy for some time now, and that was rather popular until suddenly Donald Trump becomes the nemesis of all Canadians temporarily or for a while now. But he's got to be nimble, and he's got to do what Doug Ford did, which is turn himself into Captain Canada and ask people, as between a bunch of woke liberals or the kind of people that'll drive a bunch of trucks to Ottawa. I'm not saying Pierre would do that, but the sort of as between the right and the left, who do you think's got the bigger cojones to start a fight with somebody and stand up? The people that will parking trucks downtown Ottawa and defying the law, or people that are afraid to offend people by using the wrong pronoun. Which group do you think has the bigger stones to stand up to Donald Trump?
Yeah,
I would say that right-wing people in general would be more likely to be of that type of character. And I would also suggest that I just think that it's tough to say that, well, we'll get along with Trump better because we're fellow ideologues. I think that's a tough sell. I think
I agree.
right now he's got to talk about standing up to Trump. And I think the other big sell is, do you really think that the people who have ruined the economy and weakened us, who don't want to pump gas and energy, they're the ones that are going to somehow come up with new inventive industrial policy? For example, the liberals are trying to run as conservatives now, right? And they need to come out and say, really, why buy the fake version of conservative, the alleged,
You can
the
have the
bait and
real
switch?
thing.
Oh, we promise that this time, despite the last 8 years, will be more conservative. Why buy the fake conservative when you can have the real thing?
Exactly. And
And
if
point out that they're lying, because the last time they did it under Martin, they faked it. They said they were going to cut spending and they didn't. They just cut Ontario's spending and let Mike Harris hold the bag. They're going to do it again. They should remind the younger people who didn't live through that time that all that Carney's going to do is cut your health care, cut the check to Doug Ford, and leave Doug Ford holding the bag, just like last time. Billions of dollars. They aren't going to cut the stuff like Doge is doing. They aren't going to really be conservative. And if they don't, they're not going to cut your taxes. They're going to raise them.
But I think that Pierre has to not worry about Trump, because if we go to reciprocal tariffs, I'm not really worried about that. And Senator Kennedy from Louisiana gave a great speech in Senate the other day about what can you imagine in North America with no tariffs? Can you imagine not having to spend $800 to fly between Toronto and Montreal because American Airlines can do it better, or United, or Air Canada for that matter, or not having to spend $8 for butter, or having banks that are actually, pro-business. All those things are possible with a North American economy. But I think what Pierre's got to do is he's got to get positive. He's got to bite into that apple and he's got to say, time for a prosperity agenda. Here are the five tax measures that we're going to take. We're not going to punish earners anymore. This idea, which is equivalent to an American 1038, of deferring capital gains if you put it back in a Canadian investment, I think that's absolutely fantastic. But Pierre has got to come in with a pro-prosperity agenda. He's got to pound the table on crime. I mean, all the soccer moms out there, do you feel safe sending your kids out? Do you feel like walk around your downtown? Cities that you never would have thought have become tent encampments. Go to Peterborough, go to Kelowna, places like that. I mean, I live in Hamilton. It's a zombie apocalypse. But I mean, and then I think Pierre has to sanely and prudently play the immigration card, allowing 4.5 million people into the country and damage to the health care, to the housing market of this country. And look, I don't really begrudge these people from coming here. They've come here to try to have a better life and they work hard. Go to Tim Hortons and watch those folks work. Where are the Canadians? They're sitting at home on ODSP because Justin Trudeau decided to send them checks for 2 years and never make them come back to work. Canada needs a swift kick in the ass, and Pierre Poilievre had better realize that he can deliver it, or help Canadians realize themselves that they have to get off their keisters and go out and work if we're going to make this country what it was once again.
It's funny. Some of the things you said made me think of a couple of things. So I'm thinking of a positive message and a negative message. On a positive message, the older I get, the more I realize, and I look back over the Mulroney years and all the different presidents and prime ministers we have had, I kind of feel that when there's a conservative government, corporations tend to invest and create new factories and plants and make this, there's more activity, more transactions, more M&A, because I think they have confidence. They have confidence that tax policies aren't going to change, that they might be a little more beneficial to corporations. There's some stability. They can plan around that. And it tends to just put wind in the sails of the economy to have a conservative government in general. And I think that's something we can sell. And I think when we're in a trade war, which we have been in the past, there was a trade war under Lyndon Johnson, I believe. There was a trade war with Reagan. I mean, this is not the first time. 2016, Trump put in tariffs on steel and aluminum. We've seen this coming for 10 years. The Liberals did nothing. So I think the message on the positive side should be that with conservatives, we'll do the things that will, if we're going to lose customers, right? We're going to lose some American customers or have some turbulence. We need to bring in more companies, sell more stuff, create more activity. How do you do that? You do that with conservative policies. It's going to create more economic activity per se, which is comforting.
I agree. So we're gonna wind it up. But if Pierre is listening to us ramble on, us old curmudgeons, um, one line or two lines, what's your advice to him? And then I'll give you mine.
Be nimble, adapt, and don't listen to people who just want to go negative, negative, negative. The people who didn't help you succeed in past campaigns, who snatched defeat from the jaws of victory, and we know who they are, and we know what types of messaging did or didn't work. You know, we know which communities were upset by some of the messaging surrounding immigrants that failed in the past, and don't keep your own counsel and be nimble. Use your
That's
own instincts.
that's 8 lines. You're a good lawyer. There you go. Mine very simple. From Napoleon. L'audace, l'audace, toujours l'audace. Johnny, thanks for joining me today. I look forward to carrying this on in the next while.
Thanks, Trevor.
Cheers.